In other world news, Burkina Faso's military rulers have given French troops 1 month to leave the country. Anti-French demonstrations have been held in the capital, Ouagadougou, against the French military presence. Many say the former colonial power has failed to improve security. According to the United Nations, thousands of people have been killed in Burkina Faso since 2015 and nearly 3 million displaced in violence linked to armed groups. Let's speak to Ovigwe Egwegu about this. He's a policy and security analyst at Development Reimagined, which is an African affairs consultancy. Thank you very much for joining us on Al Jazeera. Relations between France and Burkina Faso have been going downhill for some time now. What is it that sparked this latest low and the decision by the military leaders to suspend the military accord with Paris?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I would say to some extent, this announcement requesting or demanding rather that the French troops move out from Burkina Faso has been a long time coming, because we're seeing a pattern in countries where there's a military government in place, and that military government also happens to have a good relationship with Russia, or at least employing the services of Russian mercenaries on the ground. So when you look at, for instance, Central African Republic, we saw the same thing happen where French troops pulled out in December last year. Also, Central African Republic has a very close relationship with Russia and with Wagner forces present there. In Mali, the same thing. The Malian government demanded that the French troops and even all European country troops pull out, and they did.
Yeah,
so,
but it's not just down to good relations, though, with Russia, is it? Why has anti-French sentiment spiked, and not just in Burkina Faso, as you say, but in Mali as well? What is France being blamed for?
Oh, there's a whole litany of crimes or sins from colonial era, and then, of course, the imperialist campaign that has really not been productive in the West African region and even Central Africa. So it's not just a question of closer ties with Russia, but also real, genuine grievances, against France. Because if you look at Burkina Faso, for instance, and Mali, we had a period of terrorism in the mid-2000s, and then early 2000s, rather. We saw the French deploy forces, and expectation was that those forces will help with the security situation. But today, the situation is worse than it was before, when the French troops came. So there's a total disregard for the support that the French are providing, and not to mention the fact that the way they communicate with the government in the African countries does not signal any form of respect and respect for their sovereignty in that regard.
Yeah, but I mean, these problems cannot just be solely blamed on France, can they? I mean, Burkina Faso, for example, has had several coups in the last year and a half, and that's not down to the French, I would think. Same thing in Mali. What is the underlying issue here when it comes to security in these countries?
Yeah, so the problem, of course, cannot be blamed on France in any way. But what the governments are saying is they want the ability to choose their preferred security partner, right? And the problem with that is, even if they're going ahead with choosing Russia, I do not even think the Russians have the capacity to solve these problems, because the problems that the countries are facing are multidimensional. You're looking at climate, you're looking at abject poverty, you're looking at countries that economies are not growing in any meaningful way, despite the fact that populations are actually very young, people are unemployed, and populations are even growing much faster than the economy. So there is a real problem that requires way more than just military partnerships and buying more weapons and troops and all of that. And I think that is the main challenge that these countries have to face, to find a coordinated, comprehensive strategy for national development rather than just military partnerships.
If Burkina Faso, as Mali did, get rid of the French military presence, what replaces it? Because military leaders have shown in the last few years that they can't really handle the security situation on their own. What replaces it? And you talked about Russia and Wagner. Would Paris or even Washington allow Russian mercenaries to get a foothold in this region?
I think that is a real risk for African countries, because what we're seeing developing is not just French troops being kicked out. In very way, this looks like a Franco-Russia proxy war already, because the patterns are really, really clear. And that would definitely trigger a response from the United States, which is very, very keen to stifle and root out any form of Russian influence anywhere in the world, particularly in African countries where they are seen to be in the sphere of Europe. So we already were seeing the U.S. pass an act that is called the Malign Russian Influence Act, and of course that would set a legislative framework for some form of sanctions against African countries that is perceived to have ties with Russia. And then we're seeing reports that the U.S. is going to blacklist Wagner as an international criminal organization. So of course that creates more avenue to punish countries that are having ties with Wagner in particular. So I think African countries will be very careful in the way they go about, trying to fight what they perceive as bad influence from France, while at the same time setting themselves up for punishment or form of the very devastating response from French allies, in this case, the United States.
Thank you so much for talking to us about this. Ovigwe Egwegu joining us there from Ankara.